Hello everybody, Revan Magus here welcoming you. Today we're going to have an honest discussion on Graveyard Keeper. This was a game that came out a while back and it really flew under my radar. I played it, I enjoyed it, but a couple of caveats. So, if this is a game that you are looking at thinking it'll be similar to Stardew Valley or Rune Factory for instance, you're going to be a little bit put off by the content and everything with the game. Now, first of all, Graveyard Keeper just recently released its third DLC, Game of Crone. The previous ones were Stranger Sins, and I cannot remember the first one. Basically, 3 DLCs have been released. All of them add more content into the game. Now, whereas Stardew Valley starts out with a very simplistic plot of you just want a better life, you're tired of the corporate humdrum, Graveyard Keeper goes a little bit different. Instead, something happens to you. You're not sure what, don't know what happens. You wake up and there is a strange man with a red eye who tells you that you are now the Graveyard Keeper and your entire goal is to get back home to your loved one. Very odd plot to start out with. Now, within the first 5 minutes, this is where the game might put off a lot of people. Being a Graveyard Keeper is not a clean job. So the entire idea is you will get bodies from a talking donkey that you will dissect and basically take different body parts out of at the cost of reducing the body itself. This may sound weird, and honestly, it is very weird and for some people deeply disturbing. The flesh, it is highly insinuated that the flesh that you get from these cadavers is used in the processing of meat and such at the local tavern. This isn't really veiled or hidden. It's pretty much told to you that that is what it's going towards. Now, whereas Stardew Valley has this very colorful, and Rune Factory, for instance, has this very colorful palette to get you to have like a very broad, crisp look to it, Graveyard Keeper has this look of being blackwashed almost. There's like a wash on it that basically makes it look a lot darker, a lot more gritty, a lot more dark and destitute. And this is kind of the aesthetic that makes sense to go with it. Now, whereas once again, games like Stardew Valley are very deeply grounded. They're very they make sense. There's no oddities. I've mentioned before that the only real oddities is like Krobus and the Wizard and that kind of stuff. But for the most part, it is grounded. Graveyard Keeper does not have that grounded element. You end up immediately having a talking skull that befriends you. So already, you're kind of getting this oddness with that. You have a talking donkey that delivers these bodies without a driver. You end up meeting people like the wizard or astrologer. I can't remember if he's wizard or astrologer, who wants you to bring body parts to him. You end up meeting different townsfolk that want you to complete quests. And that's where a lot more of the gameplay comes around, is you are achieving minor tasks at the graveyard to basically build onto these friendships, to unlock more stuff, to level up. And whereas Stardew Valley's progression system was more of a natural, hey, I'm like working out in the fields, I'm chopping down some trees, and it naturally grew on each other, Graveyard Keeper does not do that. As you do certain tasks, like cutting down a tree, mining, you will get these, like, they kind of look like diamonds. There's 3 colors, blue, green, and red. And each of them kind of corresponds to a different track field that you will be leveling up. There's, like, the agricultural, there's the body, there's building, there's everything along that line. And you'll need to use these points that you get from doing tasks to basically level up your character and learn more. For instance, if you're deciding to do more of the morgue stuff, to remove bones That's a task and a skill that you have to unlock through this perk tree. Same with farming, same with everything like that. And the game is very complex. There's not a very... It's not as beginner friendly as something like Stardew Valley. Okay, you plant plants and then you go on and you talk to people. Graveyard Keeper requires, all right, I need to find stone, but it needs to be like a full stone. Then I put that full stone into a stone deposit that I have made. Then I take that stone over to the grinder and I grind that down into smaller stones. Then I put that into the furnace to make an ingot, and then I use that ingot to make just everything. And the one big caveat of Graveyard Keeper that I have in comparison with these other games is just the tedium that can occur from them. For instance, like the previous scenario that I just mentioned in Graveyard Keeper, that is all requiring energy throughout the entire process. And your energy is very, very limited early on, especially. And while that does make sense, and it does require more managing of your energy supply, it does make it a little bit more tedious to manage that supply of energy. Now, granted, you can eventually, have enough food, enough that kind of stuff to really force your way through everything with it. And that's fine, that works okay. But it does kind of draw on this tedium of just, at some point you're just like, I just want to be able to mine something and be able to build a pickaxe. And you can't do that. There's a long line of what you have to do, stuff that you will need, stuff that won't even be available to you until later on. And this draws into another portion that I'm going to go over, and that is in Graveyard Keeper, your tools will break. They won't disappear, but they will run out of the ability to keep using them until they're repaired. For instance, a pickaxe can go down to 0% effectiveness. Then you need to get a whetstone. You need to put that at the grinder. You need to put your pickaxe on the grinder to then do the whetstone. So it's a lot of that kind of... And it's not very well scoped out of what you have to do, at least on the initial pass, until you get used to, hey, I need to go to that grinding tool to, work on my pickaxe. You're kind of going tool to tool to tool to tool to figure out what needs to be done and what needs to be used. The second thing is each section of your graveyard has its own specific blueprint. So if you want to do a garden, like build garden supplies, you have to walk over to the garden, you have to click on that blueprint, you have to see what items you need. Then if you don't have those items, you need to go back to whatever trunk that you have and take those out. It's a lot of needing to do this. And this is just at the base level with Graveyard Keeper. Now, we're going to dig into something a little bit deeper with this, in the sense that early on, within the first 2 weeks of the game, I believe, a lot of stuff will be thrown at you that is just really crazy. Like, for instance, you eventually start leading a church. That adds a new topic of having blessings that you have to give and leading prayers and that kind of stuff. While you're still doing the exhuming of bodies, you're wanting to make sure that your church is up to has good bodies in the morgue so that it looks well. It's just, there is a ton that is thrown at you. Now, let's move into the characters outside of your main character. Now, you play as obviously the Graveyard Keeper. There is a village. There are townsfolk. It is very set in a medieval feel to it. You have knights and that kind of stuff. You have bishops. You have taverns, everything like that. One of my main drawbacks with this is none of the characters feel unique. Nobody feels, except for a few. There's the wizard, obviously, or astrologist, I can't remember, who is unique. But for the most part, the characters all kind of blend, which makes sense in a way, but also detracts. One of the biggest things in other farming simulators, other games like Stardew Valley, Rune Factory, is the cast is colorful, and you can take a look at one person in it and go, okay, I completely understand who that is. I know who that, and it very much plays into that design. You know who you're looking at. You know what each character looks like. You can pick them out of a crowd. Graveyard Keeper, I never felt that. I just always felt like, oh, this is Adam who runs a store and I can trade with him. And that's about the extent. So there's a lot of that kind of tedium to it too. So I will say overall, getting back to it, overall, I do enjoy Graveyard Keeper. I do think it's a fun game. I do think it's an interesting take. I do think if you go into it, though, with the prospect of it being very similar to Stardew Valley Rune Factory, you're going to be disappointed. It isn't that kind of game. It stands on its own in the sense of, A, its theme is completely different. B, it's 10 times more complex. Less complex than a game like Factorio, but still very complex. There's going to be a lot more to do in Graveyard Keeper than I have ever felt like there was in Stardew Valley, which both hurts and does help it. And overall, it's just the theme is completely different in general. So it's one of those games I would recommend if you're looking for a simulator of a farming mixed with taking care of dead bodies, taking care of like a church and building up and trying to unravel this story of what happened to your character. I would recommend it. Overall, I do think it's a great game. I have had fun with it. I love playing it. I actually do think it's pretty good. But it isn't for everyone, and for those that are squeamish, I would not recommend it. So I hope you guys enjoyed this honest discussion / review of Graveyard Keeper. If you did, please leave a subscribe, a like, and a comment down below. Until next time, this is Rev Mega saying I'll catch you later.